Hello, my name is Heather Anderson and I am pleased to be able to welcome you to the official launch of the newest branch of the Radical Independence campaign here in Ayrshire. Now, before I go any further, I've got some housekeeping I need to do. First of all, you might notice, if any of you have got the flyers, that we're a speaker down. And that's because Robin is really ill. So hopefully he'll be better soon, but I'm sure we'll manage to compensate for that. The second item of business is the fire exits. So there's one over there and there's one down there. If there's a fire, that's where you run. But I'm not cooking today, so I don't expect there to be anything. But just in case there is, that's where to go. The order for the meeting, we're going to have our speakers, and then we'll have a short question and answer, well, about an hour. We'll turn it over to you for a question and answer session. And then our stalls, if you look behind, you'll notice we've got a few stalls here. They're going to come up and do a little shout out to tell you what they're about, and hopefully to encourage you to go over and check them out. So, I'm aware that the group we've got today is quite diverse. We've got some yes voters. We've got here some people here that I can see have travelled quite a long way, so thank you for making that effort. We've also got no voters, and we've got several non-voters. So I thought I would kick off the meeting with a few words about what the Radical Independence campaign is and why in this post-referendum moment the movement is still growing. Now, for those that are sceptical about politics and politicians, and I can see a few of you in here, don't worry. I'm not a politician. I'm not making any kind of plea for your votes, and the Radical Independence campaign is not a political party. But it is political. It's a broad coalition. It draws people in from the Scottish Socialists, the Greens, even the SNP. It involves community activists and trade unionists, and it formed in 2012 in order to promote a left-wing vision of what independence could mean for the ordinary people of Scotland. As the referendum progressed, the Radical Independence campaign became known particularly for its mass canvassing initiatives that it carried out in urban areas like Glasgow and Dundee. And these initiatives helped to politicise some of the most deprived and politically apathetic communities in our country. This work brought in voices that we rarely, if ever, hear in political discussions. And for me, that epitomised everything that the referendum was about. It was about class. It wasn't about Alex Salmond. It wasn't about breaking up Britain, and it wasn't about some romantic notion of nationalistic freedom. It was about ordinary people, many of whom are struggling under low wages, disabilities, benefit sanctions, and decades of deprivation, finding the confidence and the courage to demand something better. And boy, did they demand. On the 18th of September, 1.6 million people went into the polling station and demanded the right to build a different kind of society, the sort that puts the power back into the hands of its people and not into the arms of its arms dealers, its bankers, its big corporate bosses, or its political elite. 1.6 million people were brave enough to defy an onslaught of government propaganda and scaremongering. And I just think that's amazing. I think it's incredible. It was an incredible achievement. Despite the no vote that we woke up to on the 19th of September, we need to remember that that demand is still there. And the issues that gave rise to that demand are still there too. 222,000 Scottish children, according to the Scottish Child Poverty Group, are currently living in poverty. The food banks are still growing. The queues outside them get longer every day. And yet our politicians, our Westminster politicians, are still turning a blind eye to corporate tax evasion, and they are still pledging hundreds of billions of pounds to renew nuclear weapons that we can never use. And it's hard to even imagine how much money that is and what we could do with it if we weren't shackled to that kind of system. So long as we lack the power to change this, so long as the power to change it lies in the hands of Westminster, groups like the Radical Independence campaign and the Commonweal will continue to grow. because the independence movement still has a job to do. That job is threefold. We have to retain people who voted yes, and that might sound obvious. They're obviously going to stay yes. That's not necessarily true. A lot of people took the chance for the first time in their lives to believe that they counted, and they woke up and realised that they didn't. For that one moment, they thought they had a chance, and then it was stripped away again on the 19th of September. We need to convince them that their voice does still count and give them the belief that they can take some of that power back. We also have to reach out and persuade no voters, but we also have to take the non-voters into account. We have to think of ways to engage and educate those who didn't think that they mattered enough to even cast that vote. And that's why we founded the Radical Independence Campaign in Ayrshire. We're in North Ayrshire today, and it's the fourth most deprived constituency in Scotland. But we only needed really a 2% swing to deliver a yes vote in this area. It's really not that much. Yet 15% of people across the constituency failed to use their vote in the referendum. And just down the road in Salkits and Stevenson, that figure was nearly 20%. If we had managed to engage just a fraction of that non-voting percentile, we could have seen a very different outcome on the 19th. Now, I'm not going to lie, and there's no denying it, engaging that non-voting demographic, what I call the silent minority, it's not easy, it's labour-intensive, and it takes a lot of hard work. And there are some people who would say, there's really no point, you're not going to get the return for your efforts. Well, we strongly disagree with that. Over the past couple of months, the Radical Independence Campaign in Ayrshire have been canvassing the demographic, and we've learned two really important things in doing so. Firstly, we learned that the incredible energy that the referendum unleashed failed to penetrate some of our communities. And that sounds, for a lot of people that are heavily involved in the Yes campaign, that's actually hard to get your head around. How can people not have engaged? Well, they didn't, and sometimes in quite large numbers. We hear a lot of talk about Scotland now being the most politically literate society in Europe, if not the world. And yet you could go down the street and knock on any door and you would have to explain to them what Trident is, what fracking is. There's still a large way to go, a long way to go in fixing some of these problems. The second thing we learned, however, is that when you do engage and when you do pass on a bit of that knowledge, that apathy and political ignorance, it quickly turns to anger. On the doorstep, we have heard people who didn't vote translate that anger into a demand for a second chance to make their vote count and their voice heard. And that gives me hope. I'm sure you've all heard David Cameron and Ed Miliband in recent weeks saying that we're never going to get a second referendum. They will block any chance of going down that route again. Well, the countdown to that second referendum has already started. And to win it, the work starts now. Nicola Sturgeon has made it clear, again and again, that the SNP cannot deliver a second referendum, at least until the people demand it. We have to create that demand. We have to continue that conversation. We have to continue to canvass. And we have to continue to politicise our country. Another Scotland really is possible. But to achieve it, we can't afford to write off a single vote. We can't afford to fail to knock on a single door, because every voice counts.